The quiet campus of Moscow, Idaho, was a place where life flowed smoothly and calmly. Streets lined with trees, dormitories filled with laughter and carefree students, cozy cafes and libraries, all this created an atmosphere of peace. But one day this peaceful town was shaken by an event that forever changed its appearance and left an indelible mark on history. Kaylee, Maddie, Xana and Ethan lived on a college campus where the doors were always open to everyone. Kaylee Gonsalves and Maddie Mojan have been best friends since childhood. Maddie studied marketing, and Kaylee planned to become a teacher. Maddie was a great joke and was always the life of the company. And Kaylee was a person who liked to plan everything. It was an excellent quality and allowed her and her loved ones to make event programs and have a great time. Kaylee was very ambitious. She always got her way and taught her younger siblings how to do it. They were both 21. The girls' friends, Xana Kernodle and Ethan Chapin, were a couple. They were perfect for each other. Xana was 20, she loved sports. Ethan was also 20, he was the eldest child in the family, and his kind and charming smile did not leave anyone indifferent. All three girls lived in the same house, located on King Road, along with two other neighbors, and Ethan often stayed with them because of his girlfriend. He was a member of the Sigma Chi male community and lived near them. Friends were very active on social media and often filmed TikToks. And even on that fateful day, Kaylee posted a photo together and captioned it, "I'm very happy because I'm surrounded by such wonderful people every day." These young people, each with their own unique traits and interests, left a significant mark on the lives of those who knew them. Their tragic deaths have left a deep wound in the hearts of family, friends, and the entire student community. In the fall of 2022, 4 local university students were found dead in their rented house. No one could have imagined that something so terrible could happen in this cozy place. An ordinary murder in Moscow seemed impossible, and even more so with such cruelty. But that night, darkness entered the students' homes, disturbing their peaceful sleep and leaving behind only a cold horror. On November 13th, 2022, an ordinary day began on the Moscow campus. Residents of the city were enjoying the cool autumn morning, students were rushing to classes, and teachers were preparing for lectures. But very soon the news spread all over the campus. 4 students, 3 girls, and 1 guy did not get in touch with friends and did not appear in class. The first to sound the alarm were friends and relatives who could not contact them by phone. These were not the students who could forget about their obligations. When the guys didn't respond to the messages, their friends decided to check if they were okay. They went to the house where the students lived, on Lincoln Avenue. When they tried to open it, they found that the door was locked. After several attempts, when none of the residents opened, the alarm began to grow. One of the friends, worried about the silence, decided to get inside through a window on the ground floor. When he entered the house, his body was covered with cold sweat. The silence in the house was oppressive. He started checking every room he entered. And the further he went, the more it became clear that something terrible had happened. He came across the bodies of his friends in the bedrooms. Shock and horror held him down, but despite this, he managed to call the police. The police arrived at the scene in a matter of minutes. The officers arrived, having cordoned off the house, began an initial inspection. The crime scene was so shocking that even experienced detectives could barely contain their emotions. The victims were lying on their beds, their bodies mutilated by stab wounds. Initially, the investigation focused on the social circle of the victims. Friends, neighbors, and teachers were interviewed. Everyone who could have been involved in this terrible crime in any way came under the close attention of the police. However, despite numerous interrogations, no obvious suspects were found. No one could explain what could have been the motive for such a terrible act. One of the main versions, which was considered at first, was related to personal conflicts. Perhaps someone from close friends or acquaintances had reasons to hate. But so far, the police have not been able to find concrete evidence supporting this theory. News of the brutal murder of 4 students quickly spread throughout the city. What seemed impossible and small, safe Moscow suddenly became a reality. Residents were shocked, unable to believe that something so terrible could happen on their home streets. In local cafes, shops, and university corridors, only one topic was discussed: who could have committed such a brutal crime. The university where the victims studied, all classes were canceled, and students were advised not to leave the campus unless absolutely necessary. The administration offered psychological assistance to all those who needed support, and also strengthened security measures. Security was doubled. and surveillance cameras began operating around the clock.
Say to the students who are scared.
I tell them I'm scared too.
Professors and teachers, knowing the students personally, were no less shocked. Each of the victims was a promising student, with their own plans for the future. The loss was irreparable, and the teachers, as well as the students, could not believe that such terrible events had played out within the walls of their alma mater. Meanwhile, the families of the dead students were gripped by grief. They were told the terrible news on a very ordinary day, when they expected to hear their children's voices on the phone or see them for the weekend. Parents could not believe that their children, full of life and dreams, were brutally murdered in a place where they should have been safe. Each family experienced the tragedy in its own way. Some could not stop crying, others fell into a state of shock, refusing to believe in the reality of what had happened. At this difficult moment, psychologists were sent to them to support and help them cope with the first terrible hours after the news. Local media quickly picked up the news, and soon reports of the tragedy filled the headlines of national news channels. The plot of the murder of 4 students in a small Idaho town has attracted national attention. The questions are who, why, and how. They were heard everywhere, but there were no answers yet. Journalists began to flock to Moscow to make reports from the scene. They interviewed residents of the city, teachers and students, trying to find at least some thread that could shed light on this mystery. However, everyone they spoke to seemed as stunned and lost as the reporters themselves. The society reacted violently. Social media was filled with conspiracy theories, speculation, and discussions that often had nothing to do with reality. Someone was talking about a random crime, someone was talking about a maniac operating in the area, and some even suggested that it could be connected with mysterious cults or sects. The residents of the city, usually friendly and open, began to feel wary. Many people began to be afraid to leave the house at night, and parents began to monitor their children more closely. In shops and public places, the atmosphere was tense. Everyone was discussing what had happened, but no one could offer an explanation. While the city lived in fear and ignorance, the police continued to investigate. A few days after the murder, they finally found the first clue that could shed light on what happened. The attention of investigators was attracted by recordings from surveillance cameras installed near the house where the bodies were found. One of the recordings showed a hooded man approaching the house on the night of the murder. He would stop in front of the door, look around, and then, making sure that no one was watching him, he would go inside. It was impossible to establish the identity of this man. The hood hid his face. However, one thing was clear: he was involved in the crime. The police decided not to disclose this lead, fearing that the suspect might escape or destroy other evidence. Investigators began to carefully examine the recording, trying to find additional details that could help identify the person in the video. Meanwhile, the public continued to be in fear and tension, not knowing who was behind these horrific murders. The answer seemed still far away. Moscow, Idaho, turned into a city on the verge of panic, where every new morning brought not answers but only more questions. The first few days after the discovery of the body, college students in Moscow, Idaho, were critical to the investigation. The police had no concrete leads, and the pressure from the public and the media only grew. Nevertheless, the team of detectives continued to work, analyzing every detail and trying to reconstruct the events of that fateful night. To improve the image quality, digital technology experts were involved, who enlarged the frame and applied filters to extract as much information as possible. It was possible to see a slight scar on the right cheek and a small tattoo on the neck, visible above the collar of the jacket. These details became crucial for further searches. During the investigation, the police also found out that a few weeks before the murder, the men told their friends and acquaintances about the strange cases of the investigation. One of the girls told a friend that someone was following her when she demanded late at night. However, she did not attach much importance to this, deciding that it might have been paranoia due to stress. Detectives began to consider the possibility that someone from the environment might be involved in their murder. A detailed extraction of the phone calls and messages of the victims was carried out. It turned out that one of the students, who sometimes communicated with the Foles, stopped contacting a few days before the murder. The police quickly came to one of the university students who matched the description. It was Brian Christopher Koberger, a young man with all the opposition among the students. Some people knew him as quiet and Brian was a closed person, but others remembered him as strange and otherwise aggressive. He had tattoos on his shoulder and several scars on his face, which made him the main suspect. Kohberger lived alone in a heavenly house on the outskirts of the city. On the evening of November 25th, 4 days after the telegram was made public, the police decided to search his house. The detective was sure that he could be the hooded man locked up on the surveillance cameras. When the police broke into Kohberger's house, he behaved strangely but did not resist. At that time, the search of the house was followed by a few events that alerted the ICE. Among the found items were the personal belongings of one of the murdered students, a bracelet that she wore on her arm, and a notebook with her notes. These findings reinforced the suspicions of the police, and David was detained. However, despite the clear evidence, the evidence was not convincing at first, so that a clarification could be submitted to the Suru. Kohberger refused to steal the testimony and insisted on his innocence. His lawyer assured him that they could get to him by accident, and that he had nothing to do with the murders. The police decided to involve criminal psychologists to compile a psychological profile of Kohberger. During the interrogations, which lasted for hours, psychology tried to understand the motives of his actions and possible causes of aggression. It turned out that in the breach, Kohberger had already come to the attention of the police due to several cases of violence sisters and was not convicted. Psychology has noticed that Brian is prone to sudden changes in settings and can experience strong outbursts of anger. He clearly professed distrust of his surroundings and often expressed contempt for people who considered themselves more successful. Envy, low self-esteem, and anger can serve as a motive for murder, especially if the men imagined the ideal that Brian would never be able to achieve. Despite serious suspicions, the police did not rush to explain. It was necessary to find stronger evidence to confirm Brian Kohberger's involvement in the murder. While he was being held in custody, the followers continued to work, trying to find other evidence that could confirm their theory. Meanwhile, the city continued to live in fear. The suspect's sisters were detained, and the residents of Moscow did not feel safe until a final decision was made. The police informed the townspeople that they would make every effort to find the reference murder and punish it to the fullest extent of the law. Against the background of the ongoing spread, new information suddenly appeared that could change everything. One of the students, the other deceased, contacted the police with an unexpected statement. He reported that he saw Kohberger on the night of the murder, constantly from the house, but not alone. He was with a man he couldn't identify. This detail changed the course of reasoning, forcing the police to consider the possibility that Brian was an accomplice, or that he could even be an extra part of someone else's evil intent. As the followers continued to gather evidence, the situation began to take a new turn. The moment came when the long-awaited results of the examinations began to arrive at the laboratory. Detectives, tired of long and carefree days, waited for these givens with bated breath. The first thing that came from the laboratory was a bookmark based on DNA samples collected at the discovery site. Brian Kohberger's DNA matched the samples found in the animal house. This was the proof that the investigation had been waiting for so long. Now the police could say with certainty that Brian was at the scene of the incident, and this opened up new opportunities for questioning and further investigation. A single DNA match was not enough to extract the binder. The detectives realized that they needed more evidence to send a direct line of clarification. They focused on finding additional evidence that could confirm Brian's participation in the competition.
Of DNA from the roommates, and as a hopping college house, many guessed.
It'll spin, it'll inject the blank.
The police decided to establish surveillance on Brian and his entourage. They put listening devices in his apartment and started monitoring his changes. The detective hoped that he would make a mistake or admit to his actions. A few days after the wiretapping began, the trackers got what they were looking for. Brian, unaware that his phone was being tapped, called a friend and began talking about his helplessness about the message. He admitted that he was at home on the night of the murder, but he said that he just went to visit the residents and nothing else. This statement was a great lead for detectives. Now the police could use them to steal on Brian during the next interrogation. The next interrogation was carefully planned. The police decided to use psychological theft tactics to force Brian to confess to the crime. This is not the most humane method of interrogation, but in some situation it provides a solution. They presented him with the results of DNA and wiretapping, leaving him unable to cancel his award at the place of prestige. Brian started to get nervous. His confidence began to decrease, and suddenly he broke down under the theft. He admitted that he was indeed at home that night but continued to insist that he did not kill his friends. He assured me that someone else might come after he left and repeat the murder. On the night of the murder, Brian came home to deal with the conflict, but the situation got out of control. At the beginning of his rage, he committed murder, and then, in a panic, tried to hide the investigation. One day he made a lot of mistakes, which eventually led the police straight to the German. In the early morning of November 13, 2022, 4 college students at the University of Idaho were stabbed to death in a shared rented house near campus. 2 female victims, Madison Mogen and Xana Kernodle, lived in the house. They worked at the same restaurant. The third, Kaylee Gonsalves, recently left home but returned to throw a neighborhood party. 4 people, Ethan Chapin, were Kernodle's boyfriend, who decided to stay in the house that night. 2 other roommates also lived in the house. They won't get to the set. Earlier on the evening of November 12th, 2 of the 4 men, Chapin and Kernodle, were reportedly at a party on the campus of the Sigma Chi fraternity from 8 to 9 p.m. They returned home at 1:45 a.m. That evening, 2 other stallions, Mogen and Gonsalves, went to the Corner Club, a downtown sports bar, at 10 p.m. and left at 1:30 a.m. Live on Twitch from the Grub Truck, a food van located 4 blocks south of Friendship Square Main and 4th Streets. Mogen and Gonsalves chat and catch up at 1:41 a.m., get their food 10 minutes later, and drive off to pick up what the police originally called Uber by driving home. The trip is about 1 mile, 1.6 km. The police later rephrased their statement, saying that the train was organized by a private group who arrived with a demand at 1:56 a.m. According to the surviving roommates, 4 students were at home at 2 a.m. 7 unanswered phone calls were made from Gonsalves' phone by her former longtime boyfriend, a classmate, from 2:26 a.m. to 2:52 a.m., and 3 unanswered calls were made from Mogen's phone to the same person, from 2:44 a.m. to 2:52 a.m. These calls were distributed, and the police concluded that they did not believe that the recipient of these missed calls was involved in the arrest. The DoorDash order marked for Xana was delivered to the house around 4 a.m.
911 from one of the 2 surviving roommates' cell phones. Police have ruled out those 2 people as suspects, but maintain this was a targeted attack.
The 2 surviving roommates allegedly returned home by 1 a.m. Initial reports said that both surviving roommates were in their beds on the ground floor at the time of the murder. They were not attacked or held hostage, and that neither of them woke up at the time of the murder. However, the affidavit in the case says that one of the surviving roommates stated that she was sleeping on the 2nd floor, the same floor as Kernodle and Chapin, before she was woken up by what sounded like the voice of Gonsalves and her dog. She stated that she later heard a roommate say something like, "There's someone here." The roommate said she believes it was Gonsalves who said it, although investigators also believe it could have been Kernodle's speech, since a forensic examination of her mobile phone download showed that she was on the TikTok app at 4:12 a.m. The surviving roommate stated that she opened the door twice within a short period of time, and the second time she heard what sounded like crying coming from Kernodle's room and a male voice saying, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." Surveillance cameras near the house recorded the sound of whimpering, loud banging, and repeated barking of a dog, starting at about 4:17 a.m. The surviving roommate allegedly opened her door for the 3rd time and saw a figure dressed in black clothes and a mask covering her mouth and nose walking towards her. The man, whom, according to the roommate, she did not recognize, walked past her and used the sliding glass door to get out. The roommate stated that she stood frozen from shock and then locked herself in her room. All 4 victims were pronounced dead at noon. Detectives said they believe the murders occurred sometime between 4 and 4:25 a.m. After searching the house, officers came across Gonsalves' dog, which she shared with her ex-boyfriend, alive and unharmed on the 3rd floor. But who is Brian? Brian Christopher Koberger was born in Pennsylvania. At school, he was a strange guy who was bullied, and then he decided to bully his classmates himself. As a student, he was heavily addicted to heavy illegal drugs, but eventually got rid of addiction. In 2022, he completed a course in psychology and moved to Pullman in August of this year to begin graduate studies. It is a neighboring campus 15 minutes from Moscow. He studied criminology. He lived with other graduate students, but he had almost no friends. Some bars and cafes near the university had internal customer lists, and there was an exclamation mark marked "Do Not Let In" front of his name. And all because Brian molested the girls several times and called them names. According to the stories of friends, if he liked some girl, then he could practically become obsessed with her. The girls said he was too persistent. In 2011, Brian complained of depression and lack of emotion. He wrote about his condition as follows: "I don't remember anything from my childhood. I used to be able to remember everything, every day from last month. And now I feel like a disembodied ghost, forever trapped in a constant now my head hurts, my ears are ringing. I can't concentrate. It seems to me that this ringing in my ears and fluff in front of my eyes are the demons living in my head who decided to make fun of me. I'm suffering. Even when I come home, I treat my family rudely, and I don't feel anything at the same time. No emotions." After the events of November 13th, Brian's students noticed that their teacher had changed. He stopped being strict, as he always was. "I started giving everyone high scores, became more open and sociable. It was as if the tension that had been building up for years had finally come out of him." Brian Christopher Kohberger, a 28-year-old graduate student at Washington State University in Pullman, was arrested on December 30th and charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and burglary for the November 13th murders of Ethan Chapin, Madison Mogen, Xana and Kaylee Gonsalves.
We lost 4 beautiful souls.
The hardest part, we cannot change the outcome.
The case has attracted huge attention from the media and the public. The trial was intense and eventful, but the evidence gathered by the police was undeniable. Brian was found guilty of murdering 4 students and sentenced to life in prison without parole.
On December 30th, 2022, Brian Kohberger was arrested in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania.
It has been several years since Brian Kohberger was arrested for the murder of 4 students in Moscow, Idaho. Despite the fact that justice has prevailed, the consequences of this tragedy have forever changed the lives of many people. The city, the university, the families of the victims, and even those who were just familiar with the victims had to live with the shadow of what happened. The families of the murdered students are the ones who suffered the most. The loss of their children became an inescapable wound for them, which only dulled over the years, but did not disappear. They constantly thought back to those terrible days when their beloved children left home and did not return. For other parents, the loss has become too heavy. They withdrew into themselves, shut themselves off from society, not wanting to contact the outside world anymore. The tragedy left them devastated, and the only reason for their existence was to maintain the memory of the dead. The university where the victims studied has not remained the same either. The introduction of enhanced security measures was the first step in response to the incident. Additional surveillance cameras were installed, the campus lighting system was improved, and the number of security patrols was increased. In addition, psychological services were organized at the university, which provided support to students and teachers. Periodic meetings and group discussions helped people cope with anxiety and fear, and return to normal life, albeit with the fear that such a thing might happen again. The tragedy itself has been the subject of lectures and seminars on criminology, psychology, and security issues. Students and teachers analyzed the events, trying to understand the causes and prevent the recurrence of such cases in the future. Brian Kohberger, despite the severity of his crimes, remained a man whose fate attracted attention. In prison, he became an object for psychological research, as many experts tried to understand the motive and what could lead to such a cruel act. His life behind bars was far from peaceful. Despite the strict regime and constant surveillance, Brian became involved in conflicts with other prisoners several times. He was haunted by his own demons, and no excuses could change the fact that he had taken the lives of 4 young people. At first, Brian tried to find support among other prisoners, but soon realized that most of them did not want to deal with someone who had committed such a crime. He became increasingly isolated, immersed in his thoughts and aware of the consequences of his actions. The small city of Moscow, where the tragedy occurred, has also changed. Previously quiet and cozy, it was now a place associated with terrible events. Tourists coming here were often interested in places related to the crime, which caused mixed feelings among local residents. However, the community has united in its pain and sorrow. Citizens began holding annual events in memory of the victims, coming together to support each other and share memories of the victims. These meetings have become an important part of the city's life, helping people find solace in general support. Although several years have passed, the memory of the victims is alive. Their photographs and stories remain prominently displayed in university buildings and local institutions. Every year, the university awards scholarships in their honor, and it becomes a symbol that they remain part of the university family. The city of Moscow, despite its tragic history, has managed to recover and start living on. Residents have learned to appreciate every minute of life and support each other in difficult times. While the pain of loss remains, the townspeople find strength in unity and hope for the future. This story has become a reminder of how quickly life can change and how important it is to appreciate every moment. The deaths of these 4 students did not go unnoticed. They changed the lives of many people, made them more aware, rallied the community, and became a catalyst for changes aimed at preventing such tragedies in the future.